Welcome back to GPB's live exploration of the Okefenokee Swamp. I'm your host, Sara Hopkins, and we're coming to you live on gpb.org from the Okefenokee Swamp Park in Waycross, Georgia. Today, we'll be exploring North America's largest blackwater swamp, and we'll be learning about the uniqueness of Okefenokee's plants and animals, as well as the people who once lived here. And during the show, our field reporters, Unzer and Chelsea, will explore the Okefenokee, and here, swamp experts will be able to answer your questions live and send us your questions by using the question box feature on our website, or just by sending us a tweet using the hashtag SwampLive. We'll also be giving you guys some quizzes during our show, so have your devices ready to submit your answers. To prepare for the quizzes, now go to gpb.org/swamp, or you can vote by sending a text to 201-561-7140. All right, well, we have with us an expert from the Okefenokee Swamp National Wildlife Refuge, Susie Heisey. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Sarah, thanks for having me. Really glad to be here.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit more about what you do here at the swamp.
So I'm the supervisory refuge ranger at the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge at our headquarters office in Folkestone. And basically what that means as a supervisory ranger, I take care of all the things that have to do with the people and the visitors that come to the refuge. We have hiking trails, water trails, a visitor center, and boardwalks. And I also work very closely with our partners like here at Okefenokee Swamp Park. One of the main things I do is education and teaching people about why the Okefenokee is so important, and that's why I'm here today.
Well, we are so glad that you are here to have your knowledge on deck. But before we go exploring, let's take a quick look at our first quiz question. So have your devices ready, all right? The first question is, which animal is most genetically similar to an alligator? Is it number 1, mouse, number 2, bird, number 3, lizard, or number 4, cat? And remember, there are a couple ways you can vote. It's super simple. So if you haven't already, just go to gpb.org/swamp and select your answer, or send us a quick text to using numbers 1, 2, 3, or 4 to submit your vote. Send it to the number 201-561-7140. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's get a better idea of what a swamp is. So let's check in with Unzer.
Thanks, guys. I'm here at the Stephen C. Foster State Park in Georgia, at the west side of the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. I'm here with our wonderful park ranger, Josh. Tell us about what you do here and this side of the park.
Well, as a park ranger here in the Okefenokee, I help people discover the swamp, see all the cool animals we have, and hopefully appreciate the environment that's so unique here in the state of Georgia.
And what do you love about the park?
I love all the wildlife, I love all the beautiful landscapes. It's just a great wilderness to come to.
Nestled along the eastern side of the Georgia-Florida border, the Okefenokee Swamp is a vast wetland that covers nearly 500,000 acres. A swamp is a low-lying area that is always wet and covered with a shallow layer of rainwater. The water within a swamp doesn't move much, allowing plant matter like bits and pieces of leaves, grass, and muck from dying plants to bond together to create peat. It's because of this soft, mucky peat that Native Americans named the swamp Okefenokee, or Land of Trembling Earth.
Josh, how many swamps like the Okefenokee are there around the world?
Well, there are quite a few swamps throughout the country and the world. The Okefenokee is unique though, and really every swamp is unique in its own special way. A lot of them may have similar species, like your cypress trees and black gum trees and the different ferns, and even creatures like alligators you'll find swamp to swamp. But every one of them are a little unique. This one, the Okefenokee, is the largest blackwater swamp in North America.
Mats of peat like these cover the swamp's open prairies, making boat and kayak travel limited to the open waterways.
Most of the swamp is completely inaccessible to people. So inaccessible that a lot of the creatures out here probably have never seen people.
So even though there's over 100 miles of waterways, most of the park is actually hidden and completely remote.
Absolutely. All those prairies and a lot of these swamp forests are so dense and difficult to travel through that people just can't get out there and see it. So you're limited to pretty much only being on those waterways.
Today, the majority of the Okefenokee Swamp is a national wildlife refuge. meaning that people are only visitors. But this wasn't always the case. Native Americans inhabited the swamp for thousands of years, and European settlers began moving to this region in the mid-1700s.
So Josh, we just docked here, and this is clearly not a prairie, this is an island. Can you tell us more about where we are?
Yeah, so this is Billy's Island, and it is one of the true islands out here. So that means it's dry, sandy, not peaty. So we're going to see a lot of pine trees up here, saw palmetto. This is also where a few different groups of people lived throughout history.
And how long ago were those people living on this island?
So the most recent people lived out here with the logging company that was here that operated between 1907 and 1927. That was the Hebbard Cypress Logging Company, and they were out here to log all the cypress trees. Their main logging camp was right on this island.
So at its prime, how many people were living on Billy's Island?
There are about 600 to 700 people that lived out here.
And they had their churches and their homes and livestock, and they all had a little city on this island.
They did, yeah, anything you could want, even a movie theater.
And their main source of supply was this railroad.
Yep, exactly.
But how exactly would you build a railroad on top of this waterway?
Well, you use pilings throughout the swamp. Those pilings, just wood posts basically, that would drive down deep into the peat. That would provide the stability for the railroad to come in.
And the peat is stable enough to be able to hold a railroad?
Yeah.
Wow. So we've walked up to something pretty interesting here. Can you tell us about what we're looking at?
Yeah, so what you see behind us here is an Indian mound. It dates to around 500 AD.
And what is an Indian mound?
An Indian mound is a mound built of earthen materials. So out here, it's built of sand. So the Native Americans who were here would have gathered a bunch of sand and built this mound.
So 500 AD, so that's about 1,500 years ago, there were people here that were putting together sand and earth to make this mound, and we can see it here today.
Exactly.
Right here on Billy's Island.
There's little evidence that humans ever lived on Billy's Island or anywhere else in the swamp. And without the disturbance of human settlement today, the Okefenokee's ecosystem is free to flourish and live naturally. And it's the park's goal to provide the best habitat possible for a wide diversity of fish, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and birds.
So Josh, you said there are birds here? What kind of birds?
We've got quite a few barred owls. You want to see one?
We can see a barred owl?
Yeah, right now.
Definitely.
So if you look right back in all these trees right here,
Yeah.
see that silhouette?
Mm-hmm.
That's a barred owl. That's a female barred owl.
How can you tell the males from the females?
So the males are a little bit smaller than the females are, and we actually see the male on occasion here as well. So that's how I know this one is the female.
And why do they choose to live in a swamp, and what kind of things do they eat?
Well, that's the reason they live out here. There's lots to eat, lots of creatures. They really like mice and rats, but sometimes also go after some of the amphibians, like your frogs and lizards.
It's this abundance of food along with a warm climate that makes the Okefenokee a great place for so many animals to live, especially the alligator.
So there are 2 species of alligator in the entire world, and you can find one of them right here in South Georgia, Alligator mississippiensis. We have a really high concentration in South Georgia. Here in the Okefenokee alone, we have as many as 12,000. Alligators eat mostly fish, though they'll also eat turtles, small mammals like raccoons, and occasionally birds like your diving birds, anhingas, and double-crested cormorants. They're not too picky as long as it's the right size.
Thank you so much, Unzer. And I see those gators are a lot bigger than the new guest that we have with us here today. Now tell me, do I have to worry about being gator bait?
No, humans are definitely on an alligator's menu. But a little guy like this may actually be food to other animals like birds or even bigger alligators.
Oh my goodness. Well, this is wonderful. Okay, so let's answer our first quiz question, speaking of. And the question was, what animal is most genetically similar to an alligator like this guy? And this is how you all voted. Let's see, we have 93% said lizard, 5% said bird, 2% said mouse, and 2% said cat. And I know how I voted, but let's see if we got it right, guys. What is the correct answer? Which animal is the most genetically similar to an alligator?
Well, and actually the 5% of y'all that said that alligators and birds are most closely related, y'all are right. Researchers and scientists today are using genetics to more closely classify animals, and they have found that birds are direct descendants of reptiles.
Oh my goodness, and this whole time, just by looking at him, you'd think he's definitely the cousin of a lizard, right? No, he's not. It's a bird, and now we know that a bird is actually more genetically similar. Well, what else could you tell us about an alligator?
Well, alligators are really neat animals and one of the most common animals to be seen in the Okefenokee. They live a really long time. They can live between 30 and 50 years in the wild. They also grow very large. This is just a baby that's about a year and a half, but the adult male alligators can grow to be over 15 feet. The largest alligator ever was 19 feet 2 inches long.
Oh, wow.
Mother alligators actually do a really neat thing with their babies. They will protect not only the nest, but their young. And the eggs, when they're in the nest, the sex of the babies will be determined by the temperature in the nest. So the cooler spots will be girls, while the warmer spots will be males.
Oh, that's amazing, because girls are cooler. I think that is obvious here. Oh, this little guy. I don't know what you are, but you're pretty cool too. So we have another question from our viewers. Daniel T. from May River Montessori in Bluffton, South Carolina asks, how was the Okefenokee Swamp formed?
Well, thousands of years ago, the ocean was actually right here where we're standing today.
Oh, wow.
And natural dunes and barrier islands formed, which are our interior islands in the Okefenokee and the eastern edge of our swamp today. As the ocean receded, there was a depression left behind, and that area gradually filled with fresh water and the peat, or the organic material that we have at the swamp base today.
And the peat is the decaying plant matter that Unser was talking about earlier.
That's right.
Yes, okay. Well, let's check back in with Unser, speaking of, and see he's on the other side of this massive swamp, and he's taking a closer look at the Okefenokee ecosystem.
Thanks, guys. So we're here on the east side of the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. I'm here with my friend Chip. And Chip, can you tell us a little bit more about why this side of the swamp is different from the west side, for example?
This is the prairie side of the swamp. The peat, on average, is deeper in this part of the swamp, and fires have, over the history of Okefenokee, burned out the peat bed in some parts of the swamp and created these open, marshy landscapes that we call prairie.
So Chip, what brought you out here into the swamp? How long have you been here, and how do you know so much about this place?
I'm probably sitting here right now because I have been fascinated with alligators ever since I was a little bitty kid. And since we've got a lot of alligators here, this became my place really early on. And the swamp has really been kind of at the heart of my lifelong interest in environmental sciences.
With its varied habitats, the Okefenokee is known for its abundance of plants and animals. There are over 620 species of plants growing in the swamp. Animals include 39 different kinds of fish, 37 amphibians, 64 reptiles, 234 birds, and 50 mammal species.
What's your favorite part about being out in the swamps, apart from the alligators, of course?
I'd love the experience of the big wild, of being in a large landscape that is still fundamentally natural. And the Okefenokee is very much that kind of place. This is one of the wildest, this is one of the largest wilderness areas in the eastern United States.
In 1937, President Franklin Roosevelt provided federal protection from logging and development by establishing the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, which covers about 80% of the swamp. And within this refuge is a national wilderness area, which prohibits road construction and other man-made structures in order to preserve the ecosystem.
So, Chip, we're on this nice wide waterway here. Is this completely natural?
This is not completely natural. This is an artifact. This was created by human beings in the late 19th century in a failed attempt to drain Okefenokee Swamp and convert it to farmland.
Why did they fail?
Technical problems, shortage of money, bad economic times. It was a combination of all of those. And some things been a little different, we wouldn't have the Okefenokee that we have today. We would have a farming district.
Do the alligators usually stay in these main waterways, or will you find them further into the prairies?
They're everywhere. They're all out through the Okefenokee wetland.
Where do the alligators fit in terms of the other animals that they interact with?
Alligators are predators. They eat other animals, and when they're grown, they eat almost any animal really that they can catch and eat.
This doesn't mean alligators are off limits to other predators, however. Of the 35 to 50 eggs a female gator lays during a season, most will be eaten by predators. And about 80% of the alligators that do hatch will fall victim to other predators such as birds, bobcats, otters, turtles, and raccoons.
That one's a little big for that raccoon to tackle. But with it being there, there may be some younger, newer baby alligators in the area, and he'll sure eat them.
So then how big does the alligator need to get until it's no longer prey and can now start preying on other animals?
When an alligator hatches, it's only about that big. And so, they grow here in Okefenokee about 6 to 10 inches a year. So, it'll take them 3 years or so before they start getting long enough that most of these other animals will start shying away from them a lot.
So, in the food web of Okefenokee, alligators are right at the top with the black bears?
When they're grown, yes, they are.
Okay. And do the bears ever interact with the alligators?
Yes, bears love to eat alligator eggs. So in the early summer, when the alligators scrape up these nest mounds, out in the swamp, the bears can smell the ground where the alligators have disturbed it, and they get out and they sniff and they find those nests and they tear them open and eat the egg.
Of course, alligators and bears are completely different animals, but I feel like one thing they have in common is when it gets cold outside, they tend to hibernate or shut down. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Usually with cold-blooded organisms like alligators, it's called torpor, but same kind of thing. It gets cold, they're cold-blooded, so their bodies are the same temperature as the surroundings, and so they have to be a certain level of warm in order to digest food and to function. So when it gets cold, they just slow down, and that's how they overwinter. Generally, our alligators don't eat.
For how long do they go without eating in the winter?
Between about Thanksgiving and about Valentine's Day. Our alligators aren't eating at all. They live off of fat.
What about the bears?
Bears, our male bears actually in Okefenokee don't hibernate, but our female bears do because they have their baby bears while they're hibernating. But to conserve energy, there's not a lot of food out here during the winter time. They eat heavily in the fall, and then they basically go to sleep. Bears are warm-blooded, so they have to eat a lot more than a cold-blooded alligator.
Other warm-blooded animals like birds use a different tactic to find food during the wintertime.
Birds, they're warm-blooded. They need a lot of energy. They need a lot of food. And so because they have a high need for food, they have to move in order to keep themselves properly fed. It's food supplies more than any other single thing that causes most birds to have to migrate.
There are a variety of bird species that call Okefenokee home, including hawks, vultures, woodpeckers, and herons.
Oh, I see something moving over there.
That's a bittern. It's a member of the heron family, like the great blue heron, but the bitterns are known for being very secretive and very well camouflaged, and they're really hard to see standing in that grass with those stripes and streaks on their body. It basically hides it from predators, but it also makes it easier for the bird to sneak up on its prey. It's a heron, so it eats fish and frogs primarily, large insects that it captures as it wades through the marsh grass.
So, Chip, we've talked about animals that are predators. Are there any plants that are predators?
Believe it or not, yes, we've got quite a few carnivorous plants in Okefenokee Swamp. This one is the hooded pitcher plant. See, it's got a little hood it caps over on top.
What does it eat?
Insects, mostly. It lures insects into that leaf that is specialized to form a tube, and there is a secretion that the plant makes that attracts the insects in, and then up at the top there actually is a sweet attractant like a
So
juice.
the insects will go to drink
So
the
they
juice.
climb up it, and when they get inside the top of it, they get down in the tube. You see how it's got these little white dots on the back of the leaf?
Yeah.
Well, that lets light in the back side of the leaf. You ever watched a fly beating itself against your screen window? And even if you go over across the room and open the door, he won't say, oh, there's the way out. He'll keep on trying to get out there where the screen is, because that's where the light is. That's what happens with the bugs that get inside. The bug is misdirected and is trying to go out the backside until it exhausts itself. And there's usually a little water in the bottom of each of those, and the bug winds up drowning.
Other unique plants in the Okefenokee include the golden club, also known as the neverwet.
The reason we call this neverwet is because of the way that the leaves, look at that, the way the leaves shed water. See, they don't really get wet. If you push it underwater, it looks like a force field on a science fiction movie. Check that out. And the reason it does that is the cell structure on the surface of the leaf. Each of the cell walls is rounded, which means with all those little rounded cell walls, there's a little sliver of air between each cell and the one next to it, and the surface tension of water doesn't allow it to get down into that airspace, and so it just stands up on top of the cells and slides off. And it was that structure that the materials engineers copied to create Gore-Tex cloth, a particularly good, rain gear.
Well, so the next time I'm wearing my raincoat, it's like I'm wearing a little piece of the Okefenokee.
That's right.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so we have our next question from the audience. Ms. Allen's class at Liberty Elementary in Canton, Georgia wants to know, is every snake in the swamp a rattlesnake?
Oh no, the Okefenokee actually has over 20 species of snakes, and only 3 of those are rattlesnakes. We have the diamondback rattlesnake, the timber or canebrake rattlesnake, and the smallest of the rattlesnakes, the pygmy rattlesnake.
And this is not a rattlesnake.
But this guy that I have right here is one of our non-venomous residents of the Okefenokee. This is a gray rat snake. Oh. Do you know why they're called rat snakes?
I don't. Why?
They're called rat snakes because that is their favorite food.
Oh, okay.
Rodents or rats. Oh. And so a lot of people actually love to have these snakes in their yard or around their barn to help keep those animals in check.
They're so smooth. It's very nice. All right, okay. We're going to go to our iPad right here. We're getting some new questions coming in. We have one from Adeline at Mount Yana Elementary School in Nacoochee, Georgia, and she wants to know, what is the most interesting animal that lives at the swamp, and why is it so interesting?
Well, I think one of the most interesting animals that we have that lives in the Okefenokee Swamp is our gopher tortoise here.
Oh my gosh.
And I do have a little baby gopher tortoise here to show y'all. And gophers are really interesting animals because they make burrows underground that other animals can live in. So they're known as a keystone species.
Oh, I see. And this guy's covered in sand right now.
And that's because we got him out of his burrow this morning.
And that's where the animals go. Okay, yes.
Right.
Oh, I love that. We have another question. It's from the students in Ms. Jeffers' class, and they're in 6th grade, and they said, what about snapping turtles? Are there a lot of them in the swamp? They want to know about the snapping turtles.
We definitely have snapping turtles that live in the Okefenokee. We actually have 2 different types. We have the common snapping turtle, which is the one you see most of the time, but we also have an alligator snapping turtle, which can get quite large.
Oh, how big do they get?
They can get several feet long and a couple 100 pounds.
Oh, wow, okay. So is it safe to touch all the animals? I know we've been handling some animals here for the show, but I don't know, is it safe to touch them around the swamp?
Well, if you're ever out in nature, hiking on a trail or on water trails, and you encounter a wild animal, you definitely don't want to approach it or touch it. These animals that we're holding here today are some of the captive animals that live here at the Okefenokee Swamp Park that are used in programs. But when you're out in nature, you're just visiting their home, so we need to be respectful of that.
And that makes it. So they're used to being handled and hanging out with the humans.
That's right.
But that does make sense. We all like our personal space. And no one wants to be on a gator's bad side, speaking of. But let's get your devices ready because it is quiz time. All right, this next question is, what would pioneers put in their yards to protect them from forest fires? So what would pioneers put in their yards to protect them from forest fires? Is it number 1, Spanish moss, number 2, sand, number 3, feathers, or number 4, peat? Spanish moss, sand, feathers, or peat? And you can vote online by going to gpb.org/swamp or text 1, 2, 3, or 4 to 201-561-7140. And as we've seen, the Okefenokee is home to a wide variety of animal species. But now let's see what the plants are all about. Let's go check up with Chelsea here in the park.
Thank you. This is Chelsea here. I am so excited. Today is all about nature. You can see my background. I am honored today to be in the Okefenokee Swamp Park, and we've got our guide Tommy here. Tommy, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you guys do here at the park.
Well, my name is William Thomas Music, and my nickname is Tommy. As I got older and retired, I came to work for the Swamp Park. And we do give boat tours out and through the swamps for people that haven't never seen wilderness or nature before. We bring them out and show them plants and trees of different kinds, snakes, alligators, maybe bear once in a while, or bobcat or raccoon.
For someone like Tommy, who has spent the majority of his life in and around the swamp, he's witnessed his fair share of animal interactions. What is the craziest thing you've experienced out here?
The wildest thing I ever saw in the swamp was a larger alligator with a nest, and a smaller alligator, probably 6 foot long, was in her territory, and she killed it right in front of a boat load of tourists.
But if ravenous alligators isn't quite your thing, there's plenty of serene landscape and plant life to observe in the Okefenokee.
A lot of the big trees you see out here is black gum, bay trees, and cypress. Biggest majority of the trees grows in the swamp are cypress and black gums. The bays, they grow up around the edges of the swamp, and there's 3 different types of the bay trees: the loblolly, the sweet bay, and the red. Our big old swamp is like a grocery store. Out here in our swamp, you can find plants to eat, meat to eat, and make medicine out of a lot of them. That is the soap bush plant, poor man's soap, we call it out here in the swamp. But early Indians and settlers used it to wash with, also repel yellow flies and mosquitoes when the mosquitoes and yellow flies came out. What you do, you get you a handful of this weed or leaf, you weeks down in the water and wet it, you kind of wad it up and you rub it back and forth. As you would rub,
That's awesome.
you see a liquid that comes out of the leaves, and that leaves, you can also use it like soap. Now give it a smell. It has a different, stronger smell.
Oh, wow, it does have a strong smell.
But the real name of this plant is a sweet pepper bush.
For thousands of years, Native Americans lived off the resources that the swamp provided. While their dinner plate at times would include alligator and bear, much of their diet resembles what we eat today.
This typical plant right here is the red bay tree. And people does use these leaves for seasoning different type foods.
Wow.
You can already buy them out of your local grocery stores, but they dried. This is the green leaf of it.
Oh, wow, I smell it. Yeah, oh yeah, I definitely have smelled this smell in my kitchen. So we've docked our boat and we've gotten out and we are walking around in the swamp.
Over
Wow,
here to your right, this plant right here is known as a briar bush that produces blackberries in the spring of the year.
Now that's definitely something we love to do in Georgia, pick blackberries.
That is right.
And while not all of the plants in the Okefenokee are edible, Native Americans and early pioneers discovered other ways to utilize the plants and trees in the swamp.
This is Spanish moss. The Spanish moss also blooms. It scatters from tree to tree by its blooms. When the bloom fills out, when it opens up, the little wind takes the seeds of the Spanish moss and scatters it out across through the air.
What is this used for, or who eats this?
This is not edible, but it is related to the pineapple family. But settlers of years ago come into the swamp. They didn't have cotton to pick the stuffed mattress and pillows with. They used the Spanish moss. And this is like a felt.
It does feel like
Years
felt.
ago, when Henry Ford first built the first automobile, they stuffed the seats with the Spanish moss. Till they realized they made a mistake because the felt draws red bugs and chiggers.
Oof.
The bark off the pond cypress tree was once used by the Seminole Indians as dye, to make dyes out of it to dye their different type clothing that they made and wore years ago.
Wow.
They would pull this bark off the tree and put it in a pail of water. For a period of days, it would turn the water a dark brown. And they would take their garments they made and soak them, let them sit down in the pail of water. For several days later, they would pull it out and it'd be the same color that the dye, the bark off the cypress tree would dye the water. It's the same color as their clothing.
Looking at the swamp water, it might be surprising that Native Americans would need to use tree bark to dye the water. After all, the Okefenokee is the largest blackwater swamp in North America.
You see the sign up there is upside down? If you look down in the dark water that has a mirror appearance, you can read it right side up. And it gets this coloration of the water from leaves and roots. The leaves fall out of the trees, lands up in the trail. As they sit on top of the water, they sink. After a period of time on the bottom, tannic acid forms from them leaves, and it gives the water the dark color that it is, but it's not as dark as it appears.
So since the water is so clean, Gabrielle, Paul, and Sarah Ann from Warner Robins, Georgia want to know, is the water good for drinking?
Well, even though the water is technically very clean, we definitely do not recommend drinking swamp water. I actually have a jar of it here, and as you can see, it's full of things floating here in the water. We have plants, suspended plants, and even tiny little insects and amphibians.
These little tadpoles swimming around.
Right. Now at the bottom of the jar is where the peat is, and the peat makes up the base of the swamp. Is very spongy, and that's where the Okefenokee gets its name, land of the trembling earth.
Oh, nice. Okay. So Remy at Mossy Creek Elementary in Cleveland, Georgia wants to know, how deep is the deepest part of the swamp?
Well, Remy, the Okefenokee is considered a deep water swamp, but it really depends on the location in the swamp, how deep the water really is. In our prairies, like we have here on the east side of the swamp, the water may only be a couple inches deep, up to a couple feet. However, some of our deeper lakes may be 5 feet or more.
Okay, so you could actually stand up in it. Oh, that's very interesting. And we have another question that just came in from Zeke at Camp Creek Elementary in Lilburn, Georgia, and they ask, does it rain a lot here?
Yes, it does. We get a lot of rain here in the Okefenokee. It does vary year to year, but we can get over 50 inches of rain, and actually 80% of the water that's found in the swamp comes from rain.
Oh, and you guys are sending in some great questions. We have another one from Miss Price's class at Liberty Elementary in Toccoa, Georgia, and they want to know, what is the temperature of the water during the summer and the winter?
Oh, good question. Well, the temperature of the water, of course, warms up because it's mostly shallow. It does warm up in the summer months. It might be 75, 80 degrees. And then it does get cold in the winter months, but we don't freeze down here in South Georgia, so it would never get below 32 degrees.
Right, and thank goodness for that.
Right.
I like that. All right, so now let's take a look at our quiz results. And remember, the question was, what would pioneers put in their yards to protect them from forest fires? Let's look at what you said. All right, some of you said 27% said Spanish moss, 50% said sand, 10% said feathers, and 27% said peat. All right, so who got it right this time? What's the correct answer?
Well, the 50% of the folks out there that said sand, you guys were right. The early homesteaders had a sand yard, which was very important to them for several reasons. As you mentioned, it was very important for them to protect their house and their structure from wildfires. That sand was put down there to serve as a fire break where there's no fuel for the fire to burn. They also would have a sand yard that would let them see animals coming onto their property, like snakes and raccoons. They can even also see the animal tracks in the sand so that they would know if there were any animals coming to try to get their livestock.
Oh, it's a modern day home security system.
That's right.
I love that. All right, we have one more question coming in here from Miss Mendoza's kindergarten class in Tucker Elementary in Perry, Georgia. And they want to know, how fast can alligators move on land and in water?
Oh, wow, great question. Well, alligators can move very fast on both land and water for short periods of time. Their tail is what helps them move in the water for swimming, and they use it for propulsion. On land, they can, in short bursts, they can run up to 30 miles an hour.
All right, this is some great information. Thank you guys so much for sending in all these questions. You're doing a great job. But let's go to our final quiz question. So get your devices out. All right, here it is. Which endangered animal can be found in the Okefenokee Swamp? Is it the red-cockaded woodpecker, the island fox, the giant otter, or the Atlantic salmon? All right, send in your votes. Remember, you can go to gpb.org/swamp or just text 1, 2, 3, or 4 to 201-561-7140. And now it's time to take our final trip, and this time, we're on dry land right here in the Okefenokee Swamp Park. Let's take a closer look at what pioneer life was like with Chelsea.
We're learning a lot about nature and plants and animals that are naturally found in the Okefenokee Swamp. But I'm interested in the people. I'm here with Leslie. Leslie, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do here.
Well, I'm cultural interpreter here at the Swamp Park and a retired history teacher. So when it came time for me to wind up that part of my profession, I decided what better classroom than right here in the Okefenokee Swamp and on Pioneer Island. We really enjoy being here and sharing the history of the people with others, because a lot of folks don't think of humans as really choosing to be in the Okefenokee Swamp, but they did.
Evidence in the form of arrowheads, ash from fire, and pottery show that Native Americans lived in the Okefenokee as far back as 4,500 years ago. These artifacts offer insight into their daily lives and culture.
What do you have here?
Well, this is a vessel that was left here in the Okefenokee Swamp at some point in time. We're really not sure. The vessel was kicked up by a cow over on a mound on Chester Island, and we've had it since authenticated, and it's been identified as Weedon Island red, which looking at it you think, well, it's red and clay. We don't have clay in the Okefenokee. No, we don't. So that just indicates that it was brought in possibly from as far away as Tampa, Florida, and maybe traded and left in an Indian mound for a part of their ceremonial purposes.
Along with these unearthed remnants, historians have also come to understand what life was like in the Okefenokee through storytelling.
Obadiah Barber is a descendant of the oldest documented family in the Okefenokee as far as European Americans, and he's the king of the Okefenokee Swamp to us. The story goes that one day Obadiah was out taking care of his cattle when a big bear came up. So, not being able to get to his rifle, he reached down and picked up a big heavy limb, kind of like this, and he used it like a club, and he beat that bear. He crumbed that bear, as the pioneers would say, and that bear didn't get up. So, ever since Obadiah did that, he has been known as the king of the Okefenokee Swamp. Now, when this attack was over, they found 2 cubs in the bushes.
Aww.
So what's that tell you about the bear that attacked Obadiah?
Definitely protecting her baby.
You're right, you're right.
Animals were an integral part of pioneer life, with many homesteads including donkeys, cows, and chickens.
Yes, a chicken coop was a pretty standard structure on most any pioneer homestead. And chickens did serve other purposes besides food. They did have medicinal use.
Yeah.
For example, if someone got a case of the chicken pox, they would take the little child or adult into the chicken house, have them lay down in the dirt, and let the chickens run back and forth over them. And they believed that would cure it. If somebody had a case of the whooping cough, they would get daddy or brother to go out into the woods and bring in several of these. These are red-headed, pileated is the official name, woodpeckers. And daddy and brother would strip off all of the feathers and throw away the bones and the guts and the skin, and they would keep just the meat and put a little water and salt in the pot with the woodpecker meat, and they would simmer it all day until it was basically mush.
Wow.
And you would have to eat some of that woodpecker stew every day for 5 days. But they swore by that as a cure for the whooping cough.
So kind of a little folklore mixed in with some modern medicine.
Exactly, and maybe a little more folklore on some cures than others. For example, if you had a wart, they would give you this little packet of medicine. And so I'm going to give you this in case you ever get a wart, you'll have what you need handy.
Thank you.
But inside is corn. And now at some point during the day, drop that packet of corn behind you where somebody else will pick it up. Don't look back to see where it lands and say, "Go away, wart." And pioneers believed that would cure your wart.
Pioneers were self-sufficient in many ways. In addition to creating their own medicine, they also made syrup, built their own homes, butchered and cooked their meats, and even made their own soap. Using potash, lye, water, and animal fat, settlers would cook up bars of soap that they used for bathing, washing clothes, and scrubbing floors.
What are some of the things that attracted the pioneers to come out to Okefenokee?
Well, certainly the environment. They could live off the land. Plenty of water for drinking or for fishing, plenty of wood for building homes or fires for cooking or making soap, plenty of wildlife for eating, and definitely for the furs. That was their money. They bartered furs for things that they needed at the trading post. But for the most part, they didn't need much of anything at all.
Well, that was just so fascinating. Thank you, Chelsea. And people don't live in the swamp anymore, but that doesn't mean they aren't involved in helping conserve and protect the Okefenokee. And one of those people is Michael Lusk, who works at the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. Michael, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it.
Tell us a little bit more about what you do here.
Okay, I am the refuge manager, which means that of the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, which means I oversee all the operations within the National Wildlife Refuge to protect our native plants and animals. Now, I've been fortunate in my career that I've worked all over the United States, and I have a specialty background in invasive species and endangered species. Now, the difference is invasive species are non-native species. In other words, they weren't found here originally before man got here to the Americas, that have come in and can do harm to the native plants and animals that live in the area. So a good example of that might be when there are pythons down in Florida. But the great thing about the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge is there are virtually no invasive species. It's very clean, as we would call it. So that makes the Okefenokee a wonderful natural laboratory to see what the land and the animals and the plants looked like before there were large impacts by humans. So it's very interesting. Now, you can compare that to endangered species. Now, endangered species are native plants and animals that are in danger of becoming extinct. And by extinct, I mean by disappearing from the wild unless we as people do something to help them out.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. So that means you are absolutely the perfect person to help us answer our final quiz question, which was, which endangered animal can be found in the Okefenokee Swamp? Let's see how you guys voted. All right, we have 41% said the red-cockaded woodpecker, 14% said the island fox, 38% said the giant otter, and 16% said Atlantic salmon. So This is pretty split up. Who got it right this time?
Well, those folks who said the red-cockaded woodpecker, they got it right. And the red-cockaded woodpecker is called that because the male woodpeckers have a tiny red spot right behind their ear. It's called a cockade. So that's why they're called the red-cockaded woodpecker. Now, the reason they're endangered is because they have very special habitat needs. They need large pine trees with very open understory to live. And these trees have to be 80 or more years old, so very old trees. And the reason they need that is because these woodpeckers are very unique. They're the only birds in the entire world that build a cavity into the heart of a living tree. All other birds that build cavities use dead trees. These are the only birds that use living trees. And they have to go very slowly, otherwise they'll get all covered in sap and they couldn't fly.
Right.
So they peck a little, let the sap dry, peck a little more, let the sap dry. So building a single cavity can take anywhere from 6 months to 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Right, exactly. And the tree has to be big enough and old enough for them to build a cavity in it. So they like the big open pine forests that we have in this area.
Absolutely.
In order to survive. Yeah.
And it doesn't hurt the trees when they do that.
No, it doesn't, because they build a little hole and then they go into the middle of the heartwood, which is dead anyway. Oh. So no, it doesn't hurt the trees. And then to protect the woodpeckers, we mark those special trees with a big white band.
Oh.
So if you come visit us here in the Okefenokee Swamp, you'll see these special trees set aside. Now those trees are protected and you can't cut them down or harm them in any way. And of course then when the birds are breeding, you can't disturb them either.
Oh, that's amazing. I need
Yes.
to go see if I can find one of those trees marked so I can go sit out and look and if I could see a woodpecker. This is really interesting. All right, let's bring Susie back to help explain some other ways that you guys help protect the animals and manage the swamp.
Right, so one of the things that we do at the refuge to manage our habitat, specifically for the pine trees and the red-cockaded woodpeckers, is prescribed burning. We do a lot of fire management on the refuge, and we use very special tools and specially trained folks to get that work done. Michael here is holding one of the tools that our crews will use. It's called a drip torch, and what we do with the drip torch is we will slowly drag fire or bring fire through the landscape with these fire crews to do a prescribed burn. Okay. We also use helicopters sometimes for our prescribed burns, and we'll use these small spheres that will drop out of a helicopter. They're called ping pong balls. Okay. We call them ping pong balls. And when they drop to the ground, they will ignite, and then gradually that fire will grow together.
Oh, goodness gracious. And those are not ones you'd want to play an actual game of ping pong with, I'm
No,
sure.
ma'am. No, ma'am.
So a lot of people, when you say fire, it seems like a very bad thing, but you're saying it's very controlled and it's very good for the environment.
That's right, that's right. Prescribed burning in this part of the state is very common, and we do a lot of prescribed burning here on the Okefenokee, and we use special conditions, very specific conditions when we do those prescribed burns, and folks that are very trained, specially trained to do the work.
And the animals are okay during this time.
That's right. You know, a lot of people ask what happens to the animals in a fire, and really, you know, bigger animals like deer and birds and bear will just gradually move out of the area. They can run away or even walk away out of that area that we're prescribed burning, and then almost immediately will move right back in after the fire's moved across. Smaller animals will even use those gopher tortoise burrows that I mentioned earlier and go underground to escape the fire.
Absolutely. Those little ones, I'm sure the bigger ones make bigger holes, right?
Right.
Okay. And Michael, both of you can tell us what are some ways our audience and everyone watching in class or at home can help protect the Okefenokee and just wildlife in general?
Oh, thank you. That's a very important question.
Yes.
And really, the most important thing people can do is just get outside and enjoy nature. You know, just enjoy it, because people protect what they love, right? And so if we learn to love the outdoors and love nature and love the birds and the animals and the plants, then we're going to want to protect them. So once you get used to being outdoors, come see us in the Okefenokee Swamp, and there's 3 different entrances into the swamp. There's Stephen C. Foster State Park in Fargo, Georgia, where we are now, the Okefenokee Swamp Park in Waycross, Georgia, and the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge in Folkestone, Georgia.
Okay.
And remember, the Okefenokee Swamp is huge. It's half the size of the state of Rhode Island. That's how big it is, yes. And it's so big, there's all kinds of different things to see. So you can go to each different entrance and see something completely different. And we hope people will come into the area and see the swamp. And then once you you learn to love the swamp and you learn to love the alligators and the plants and the red-cockaded woodpeckers and all that, then you'll want to help to protect it. So for example, maybe you won't throw your trash on the ground. You'll go out of your way to find a trash can to put your trash in. You know, then maybe you'll learn, oh, well, we shouldn't feed the alligators because it's bad for them, so you won't do that. And, or if you go fishing, you're like, well, I'm going to obey all the fishing rules and regulations because, you know, I want to help to protect the fish populations as well. So that's always very important. And then, of course, there are special groups that are dedicated to helping protect the swamp. So, for example, at the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, we have a group called the Okefenokee Wildlife League, and they can be found on Facebook. And so you can go and join that group and help protect the Okefenokee Swamp.
Such good information. Everyone needs to check that out. We need to keep this place just as beautiful as it already is and try to make it even more beautiful if possible. I don't know. This is my first time here, and it is gorgeous. Let's go to some questions you guys are sending in to us. These are great. Deshonda at Center Elementary right here in Waycross asks, how long can snakes live?
Want to try that?
Sure, yeah, well, snakes can live, and especially here in the Okefenokee when they're in the wild, they can live anywhere from 5 to 10 years normally on average.
Okay, so not too old, probably a little bit older than some of the people watching, but that sounds good, yeah. Miss Haybecker's third grade class from McAllister Elementary in Richmond Hill, Georgia wants to know, what is the best time of year to come visit and see lots of alligators?
Well, really, we recommend people come in the springtime when it's still a little cool. And in the mornings, that's a really good time to see alligators when they're just laying out on the banks. You know, it's still a little cool, but they're laying out to get some sunlight and heat up. And so that's a really good time to come. And a lot of people also like to come during the fall as well, where it's also a little cooler. Of course, you can see alligators year-round, and it's just most people don't like to come in the heat of the summer, you know, because it's not only hot, but there's a lot of insects and things like that.
All the mosquitoes.
But nevertheless, you know, come in the summer too, because you can see different things every time of the year.
I know, it does feel amazing right now. We've been outside all morning, and it is perfect weather, let me just tell you. All right, this next question is from Peyton and Ola Middle School from McDonough, Georgia, and they want to know if people are able to fish here, and if so, what type of fish would they catch?
We do have a lot of people that come to fish at the Okefenokee, and they can fish either from a boat or from the banks in different areas. Fishing is popular here in the springtime, and they can catch fish like flyers and warmouth, and a lot of other brim species that are found here.
Oh, and let's do one more from the students at Big Creek Elementary in Cumming, Georgia, and they want to know, what's the best thing you have learned from working at the swamp?
Wow. I think the thing that I have learned personally is how diverse the swamp is. You know, because when I first came here, I thought, oh, it's just a bunch of big cypress trees. But that's not true. We also have these large areas called prairies that are just sort of open grasslands with, you know, a thin layer of water. And that's where all the water lilies bloom. And they're in bloom this time of the year. It is stunningly beautiful.
It's absolutely gorgeous right now.
To see all those white lilies out. And then we have other areas that are really thick and brushy, and that's where the blackberries like to be. And so I was amazed myself at just the amount of diversity in the swamp.
It is so much to see here, and there is more to learn, but unfortunately, we have reached the end of our program today. Thank you so much to the students for participating. We were just swamped with your questions. And thank you to our brilliant experts here. You guys gave us some great information. Susie Michael from the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, as well as all of our friends reporting from the swamp. However, the fun does not have to end here. Go to gpb.org/swamp and you'll find some additional resources to continue the conversation. Also, you can catch an encore of this program tonight at 5 o'clock on GPB TV. Until next time, I'm Sara Hopkins. Thank you so much for tuning in.